This is a practice paper for you to attempt at home. It's an assessment and it's good for revision for the proper examination in the summer. This is last year's 2011 Germany in Transition paper, 1929 to 1947. So it will cover everything we've looked at about Hitler, the rise of the Nazi Party, the Weimar Republic. Question 1 is always compulsory, you have to do it, and questions 2 and 3 you choose which one. We strongly recommend you choose question 2 in the summer because that's what we've studied in depthly. You put your name at the top as you see and the candidate number. You'll be given a designated space in which to answer your questions, and there are supplementary sheets you can use as well if there's insufficient room in the booklet. The bigger answers are towards the end of the exam paper, and it may be worth doing these first, at the end of each question I mean. Question 1 is a source-based question. So, study the sources below and answer the question. So you would spend a short amount of time studying the source A. What does it show you? It shows you the unemployed in Germany during the Depression years, 1929 to 1933. And it's a graph. It's a 2-mark question, so don't waste too much time on it. Just get it done and bank it. What does source A show you about the impact of the Great Depression on Germany? You can only answer up to level 2. Level 1. So, it shows you that a large number of Germans were without a job or unemployed. Therefore, unemployment was rising. In 1928, it was just under 2 million. By 1932, it was over 6 million. So unemployment tripled in those 5 years. It showed the number of unemployed rose every year between 1928 and 1932. And we know this, it was the Great Depression, the Wall Street crash and worldwide depression really hit Germany badly. But you can also notice that unemployment started to fall after 1933. Remember, Hitler came to power January 1933. So those are 4 or 5 things you could include. 2 of those points, 2 marks. Don't waste too much time. Bank it and move on. The next question looks at source B. It's from a school textbook written in 2003. Use the information in source B and your own knowledge to explain why many Germans voted for the Nazi Party after 1929. 4 marks, short, snappy, 1 or 2 paragraphs. You can only answer up to a level 2 here, and you need to use your own background knowledge as well as the source to achieve the highest mark. Don't do one or the other. You will only score a maximum of 2 marks. You're aiming for 4. Don't drop marks here. So, here's an example. Source B shows that the Great Depression resulted in a massive rise in unemployment. The Weimar government seemed to be doing little to solve the problem of a depressed economy. Brüning was nicknamed the uncaring Chancellor, or the Hunger Chancellor, for his lack of action. Many middle-class Germans were fearful of the growth of the Communist Party. Hitler offered the prospect of a strong Germany, strong leadership and improved economy. The change in the political and economic circumstances therefore resulted in millions of Germans voting for the Nazis. You could add in that Hitler was very persuasive, was a great speaker, that the Nazis were iconic. They were also quite brutal. The SA, the Hitler's private bodyguard or private army, were quite ruthless and disrupted political meetings and beat people up and used fear. This may have influenced people to vote for the Germans. You could add more, that the Germans wanted strong leadership and the militaristic outlook of the Nazis and the nationalistic outlook of the Nazis appealed to the German workers. Use the source mixed with your own knowledge to answer this question. There's some great pieces of information within the source that clearly states some of the things I've just said. Whoops, let's get this to the forefront. There we go. Source C. Source C is a cartoon entitled Göring the Executioner, showing Göring outside the burning Reichstag. It was published in a German communist magazine immediately after the Reichstag fire in 1933. So you've got to start thinking about, it's a 5-mark question, the provenance of the source. Who, when, why and what. The purpose. Who are or who is the author of this source, and what is the main purpose? How far does source C support the view that the Nazis were responsible for the Reichstag fire? Clearly you've got to make a judgment. Level 3 is the top mark you can achieve for this answer. You have to address the answer or the issue clearly and make a judgment. Use a source and your contextual knowledge to offer a judgment, to make a judgment. So, for example, the source clearly supports the view that the Nazis were responsible for the fire. Why? Because Göring is holding an axe, implying that he has attacked the Reichstag building. You can see that with your own eyes. Göring, the Henker, the executioner. That you know with your own knowledge that the Nazis were quick to blame the fire on the communists, and that they used the event to have many of the leaders arrested and imprisoned. This led to the Enabling Act of March 1933. The poster is very biased, you can detect that, and your historical skills will enable you to write that down. It was produced for a communist magazine, AIZ, and was published shortly after the fire. The communists are trying to show that the Nazis started the fire on the orders of Göring. This is a view that you know many modern historians still hold, because they've got the beauty of hindsight and research, and they can piece together the jigsaw of events to see why things happened, the multitude of causes behind this. So you've got the beauty of that as historians. But clearly, Source C does support the view that the Nazis were responsible, even though it's biased and one-sided by the communists for a communist magazine. It does support the view, quite visually, in a visual way, that the Nazis were responsible for the Reichstag fire. So balance that with your own knowledge and what the source is showing you, even though you know the source is biased. Question D, looking at source D. How useful is source D to an historian studying the reasons for the collapse of the Weimar Republic in the early 1930s? Again, you need to be writing at a level 3 with explanation and analysis to achieve the top score. You need to look at the provenance of the source now. Who has written it? It's an American journalist who worked in Berlin in the early 1930s. So he was around at the time of the fall of the Weimar Republic and the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. He's writing in a book which he would have spent a lot of time researching for the rise and fall of the Third Reich, i.e. the Nazis and Nazi Germany. He's written it in 1959 with the benefit of hindsight and research, and his journalism skills will enable him to undertake this. Therefore, you've got to use the source and your own knowledge to judge. Again, it's making a judgment. If you don't make a judgment, you won't hit above 3 marks. How useful is source D? So, the source is really useful, and we know all sources have some type of use to historians. But the question is asking you, how useful is source D to historians studying the reasons for the collapse of the Weimar Republic in the early 1930s? It's really useful. The source tells you, or alludes to, the major political weaknesses of the Weimar. You can make a judgment. It's quite extensive. There are lots of reasons in that source outlined for you clearly. For example, the use of proportional representation meant that no one party ever achieved an overall majority. The result was coalition governments. This resulted in weak governments which couldn't make decisions or pass laws or make positive change happen because they were never in agreement. These governments often collapsed, causing frequent elections and instability. After 1930, the President was forced to keep Chancellor Brüning in office using Article 48, ruling by decree. The Chancellors after Brüning, von Papen and von Schleicher, were not leaders of the largest party. Therefore, parliamentary democracy in the Reichstag had ended. This was known as political scheming, the era in which the Chancellors were playing each other off. There's your own knowledge being added in. By 1932, Hindenburg was old and growing senile, which weakened his authority. Again, this is a view of William Shirer, the American journalist, who worked in Berlin in the 1930s. but you can add your own knowledge to support that and to support how useful the source is. He would have had first-hand knowledge of the political situation in Germany when he wrote this book, and he could have researched it very well after 1959, up until 1939 when he wrote the book. It's personal experience, and again the benefit of hindsight makes his view very, very useful to historians. Finally, moving on. Whoops, what have I done there? Let's go back. Where's Elliot when you need him? Right, here we go. These two sources say different things about the Night of the Long Knives. Now you know about the Night of the Long Knives, okay? The 30th of June, 1934, when leaders and influential people in the Sturmabteilung, the SA, were murdered. It's asking you this question to answer why these sources have different views about that event, and it's worth 8 marks, so it's a big one. To get your A grade or your A star grade or your high B grade, you've got to hit a high score here. It tells you, you obviously read both sources first, but it tells you to use the content of the sources, quotes for example, and the author's background to answer this question. You've got to use the provenance of the source and recognise bias, but you've got to understand the sources as well and what they're saying. For example, Source E clearly suggests that Röhm and the SA leadership were planning a second revolution which was aimed at replacing Hitler. They had been under surveillance by Göring and Himmler for several months, and their plans were well advanced. This caused Hitler to take action against them. Source F counters this argument, or this interpretation, by saying there was no evidence that Röhm was planning a second revolution. The fact that the action against the SA was undertaken with no resistance is proof that they were not ready to carry out a coup or a takeover. The SA were unprepared and were unable to fight back. Over 400 of them were eliminated. So it shows you why they're different and how they're different. Source E is a statement by Göring during a press conference. He's saying what he wants the world and Germany to hear, to back up Hitler's actions. And he's reporting in a national newspaper on the 2nd of July 1934, a few days after the event. Source F is the view of an historian, Karl Bracher, who published his book, The German Dictatorship, in 1971. His view would have been well researched, so you've got to understand the context at which both men were responding in. One had had time to research it, the other one is speaking off the cuff to justify action that had happened very recent. To get the best mark, you've got to undertake a balanced answer. Good support for the sources, using quotes to back up your own knowledge. Okay? For example, source E and F provide contrasting accounts of the reasons for the Night of the Long Knives. However, you would be looking at why they have contrasting accounts. Why Göring is attempting to justify Hitler's actions and claiming it was necessary to do what was done. You would also need to look at the fact that Source F is written by a modern historian, again with time to reflect and research, but it's 40 years after the event, and therefore it would be different, wouldn't it? So you have to add in explanation as to why it would be different. The circumstances under which both sources were written thus determines why they are different. So much in their comments on the Night of the Long Knives. Level 4 would be a more sophisticated answer, and you would use quotes from the source to back up what you're saying. Karl Bracher may have more evidence to support his view, whereas Göring was justifying what had happened. Good luck with this paper, and I hope you find it useful as a revision tool.